What does it mean to be alone? To have no one? No mother, no father, no one who loves or cares about you at all. I recently decided to watch the new special episode for Invincible, focusing on the backstory of Adam Eve. The episode shows Sam, or Adam Eve, from the moment she is born to her later years as a teen, finding her powers, fighting criminals, and discovering her dark past. Sam during this time finds many answers to questions she has been asking herself her entire life. You see, unlike Invincible, Sam is not fighting an all-powerful parent. No, her obstacle is different. While she does have physical opponents to hit around, her barrier to overcome is something she has sadly been cursed with since birth: the cold burden of solitary, destined to a little girl not born with accepting surroundings or parents. Sam was taken from her mother pretty much immediately and given to her adoptive parents for her own safety. Her mother loved her dearly and wanted her to have a normal life away from the cruel, scientific experimentation of the army, so she was switched with another baby who did not survive after childbirth. Even though Sam's new parents loved her, they would have difficulty understanding her because of her superpowers, which would lead her into isolation. From an early age, Sam did not fit in with other kids because of her powers. She could see the atoms in their bonds and sense their chemicals of their makeup. Even though she did not understand what they were, she would try to make sense of them by drawing them on many pieces of paper and build them out of Legos. This would upset her parents, believing her to be weird and far from normal. This would have negative effects on a very young Sam, as she could not help that she was different. In fact, it took her babysitter complimenting her that gave her any sort of reassurance that she was special and her abilities were gifts. Even from an early age, Sam did not feel appreciated by her family. Her powers divided her and her parents. Later in Sam's teenage years, she would confess to her best friend that she wanted to run away, feeling that her parents believed she was a weirdo and had rejected her, instead wanting a different daughter who, in her words, got straight A's and did her piano lessons. Sam's loneliness would only grow when her own best friend would reject her after revealing her powers, telling her normal people aren't supposed to do things like that. Sam was a little girl who grew up having everyone that was supposed to uplift her reject her, making her feel as if she did not belong. The feelings that Sam was experiencing are natural in everyone. Not knowing what to make of her harsh situation, she decided to make the best of it and turn her powers towards becoming a superhero, creating a mask and a costume for herself and saving dogs and stopping robberies. In her own search and rejection of her surroundings, she would come into contact with her maker, Dr. Brandyworth. Dr. Brandyworth is the scientist who helped Sam's mom escape and switch Sam out with another baby in order to hide her from the military. He is almost like the father figure she never had and actually seems to care about her, even though he is not her real father. Unfortunately, meeting with Dr. Brandyworth would lead her into also coming into contact with her siblings. Here, Sam would have to deal with the guilt, the pain of being the only one of her siblings to have a normal life. Her brothers and sisters did not have the luxury of having Dr. Brandyworth helping them and have been turned into monsters, most of them not even being able to speak and survive long out of their test tubes, being so vilely mutated by the military in a vain attempt to recreate Sam. The guilt Sam must experience for simply just existing, while her brother lies dying in her arms, having spent too long out of his tube. The pain Sam must feel as the only family she has ever known is taken away from her. Adam Eve has been forced into a life where she has felt so lonely, never being a part of the flock, even amongst her own family, and now for the first time meeting someone who is actually her real family, and yet is immediately taken away from her. Her despair and loneliness seem to be inevitable, at least in her perspective. Sam saves Dr. Brandyworth, but is eventually captured by the military. She is brought back to the initial lab where her siblings were experimented on. Not only does she find out that her real mother is being used as a barely living incubation machine, but is being used to produce more people like Sam. But shortly after meeting her mother, she loses her mother, her real mother, who dies in her arms. And yet Sam's torment is not over yet, because on top of that, Dr. Brandyworth, the only remaining person in the world who cares about her, is shot in front of her. Adam Eve in this moment has been shown that the family that she has so longed for was real, and yet she was too late to save them. The love of a real family who accepted her could have been a reality, and yet this illusion was taken away from her as quickly as she found it, and all of this while still being a child. Her life has been nothing except loneliness and disappointment. If there's one thing that I've always found interesting with shows like Invincible and The Boys, is they operate in a weird gray area of storytelling. This episode, like the end of Invincible Season 1, does not end with a happy ending, but instead a teenage girl breaking down in her room over the family that she never had. The love of a family that she so desperately wanted with all of her heart as a vulnerable child, being nothing more than an impossible dream. But that is not the end of her story. In Invincible, we see years later Samantha is still very much at odds with her parents, resulting in a line I think very much so illustrates the divide between her and the people around her. While leaving home to get a fresh start, Samantha's father tells her, "The worst day of my life was when you got powers," resulting in a line from her that hurts much more than I thought it would. Adam Eve has already come to terms with her powers, viewing her and her powers not as two different things, but instead as one entity, and her father's rejection of her powers as something to be ashamed of is seen by Samantha as really a rejection of her. Because in her eyes, there is no her without her powers. It is only after leaving the team that she has tried to find companionship in, and leaving her family that for so long has been ashamed of her, and finding her own path that she finds happiness. Samantha finds happiness in her own solitude, living alone, and helping those around her. She is not scornful of the wrongs done to her, but instead accepts that whilst being able to change literally the molecules around her, she cannot change the people who've hurt her. She accepts her seemingly lonely destiny, as while she does not have a family or even a team, she can still do good and will not stop her heroic works, or be angry at the events that she cannot control. An amazing scene truly showing Samantha's growth happens after Omni-Man destroys the satellite. Samantha tells Mark they should check it out, as it's their responsibility. While Mark initially rejects his responsibility, being upset about Amber, Samantha rejects Mark's pettiness, telling him that she will not ignore the world. Samantha has dealt with far more than Mark has up to this point, and yet despite her losing her entire family, her adoptive family, and being betrayed by her former team, will not give up on the world. The tragedy of Adam Eve is a lonely one. Whereas Mark loses a father by the end of season 1, Samantha has lost a father, a mother, her siblings, her team, and even her adoptive family. Samantha was born to be the perfect creation of Dr. Brandyworth, and yet despite his best efforts, would not have a normal life. Dr. Brandyworth and her mother wanted so badly for her to have a normal life, and yet she would constantly be scrutinized for her powers, which she believed made her special. To her, the attacks on her powers were really attacks on her. Her abilities made her, well, her. Her tragedy is that she is strong enough to accept her powers and not be ashamed of them, and yet her family and loved ones are not. And anyone who does accept her for her and love her for her always ends up meeting the same fate, dying in her arms. Additionally, all of this happened to her as a child, an innocent child who wants so badly to have the love and acceptance of a family. And yet, that was never her destiny. She does not despair, but instead opts for a fresh start, continuing to help people, even if that means being alone. That's all.